to talk about this new Knocked Loose record that they called You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To. Now, gotta rip the band-aid off before we even get started, okay? Did I like the record? Yeah, sure, it was a fine record. It was okay. I liked it well enough, okay? Not the worst record of the year. Actually, pretty good little listen. This is Evil Content Cop. I gotta hand out 5 charges as a part of this series. So I went through all the nooks and crannies of their new release and I found 5 charges to lay upon the hypest band to come out of hardcore, Knocked Loose. Now you see, Twitter's been losing their mind over this record. Everybody is so hyped, over the moon for this Knocked Loose album. They've been hyping it up for months. That Poppy track, those other tracks. And to be honest with you, all the teasers were okay. I wasn't going into this being like, oh, this is going to be a brand new Knocked Loose, because I'm a longtime Knocked Loose fan, and I was still just getting Knocked Loose. And that's okay. That's not necessarily a criticism. But they started to kind of go in this spookier direction from an aesthetic standpoint that I wasn't really vibing with so much. But I'm getting ahead of myself, okay? This wasn't the worst record of the year. This wasn't their worst record even. This is their second best record because nothing is gonna beat Laugh Tracks. So I'm just gonna tell you the positives right off the bat, and then we're going to get into all of these negatives, all of these charges, and then probably throw Knocked Loose in the slammer for a couple nights. Because if I'm being honest with you, we don't really have any felonies out here. Just a bunch of misdemeanors, just a bunch of low-hanging gripes, okay? All of this stuff is nitpicking, but nitpicking is fun to do on the internet. So the positives, the song lengths. I love how long these songs are. They don't overstay their welcome. They're in, they're out, they do their thing. Good stuff. Anywhere from under a minute to about 3 minutes is the perfect length for a song. Some songs go a little longer than 3 minutes, and then the closer goes to like 4+ minutes, and that's okay. And that leads to a great runtime overall for the album. But the runtime does come into play during the critiques that we will get into in a little bit. And it would be idiotic of me to leave out the fact that this album is indeed very heavy. If you like heavy music, you are probably definitely gonna like this record. It's extremely heavy. Time to choose violence. And just like Brody King says on God's Hate, violence is forever. The first charge that I'm gonna lay onto Knocked Loose is 2 counts of evading dynamics. Now what do I mean when I say evading dynamics? Brian Garris is vocally a one-trick pony, okay? He starts the same, he ends the same. There's not many ups, there's not many downs, not many peaks and valleys, not that kind of thing going on with Brian Garris. He's gonna come out with his high register shrieks and you're either gonna love it or you're gonna hate it. But he is technically nailing it. So from a technical aspect, that's okay. But from a listening standpoint, it starts to wear thin pretty quickly on my ears. And then the second count of evading dynamics is going to the instrumentals, because it's pretty much identical from song to song. Knocked Loose have their formula down pat. They go into this record being like, how are we going to be the most knocked loose that we could ever be? So on one hand, that is knowledge of your own identity, which is great. You know what makes you, you. You gotta love to see it. But I would love to see them try other things, because they are very talented and I think very capable of doing it. But I think that they're really like latching onto what is safe and what they know is gonna kind of work. Charge number 2, 1 count of flow resistance. Now when I talk about flow resistance as it pertains to a record, it doesn't have anything to do with what you would think of flow as in like hip hop or whatever. That's not the flow I'm talking about. But from the beginning of the record to the end of the record, are you able to go from track to track and flow nicely from front to back? And I'm here to say, no, you cannot. There's not really the best flow going on here in this sequence of tracks, in my humble opinion. So this is where the short runtime comes into play as a positive and as a negative. I like the 27-minute runtime. I think that is keen. But the fact that I needed to take 2 listening breaks during a short album kind of speaks for itself, no? The first song, I'm like, oh, this is really heavy. Then the second song, I'm like, okay, yeah, really heavy. Then the third song with Poppy, I'm like, okay, yeah, extremely heavy, really liking this. And then the next song, I'm like, okay, yep, Still very heavy, really liking how heavy this is, but there is a little bit of beauty to that as well. But I did have to take 2 listening breaks during this record, and I cannot ignore that and leave that rock unturned. Next charge number 3, 1 count of fumbling. These guys really should have sold out. Now, coming from a DIY guy like me, talking to a DIY band like Knocked Loose, I should be happy that they haven't sold out. They're still on Pure Noise Records. They're still very, very heavy, and they're not letting up, and they're not letting go of their style and their sound whatsoever. And there's a lot to be commended for in that respect or whatever. But on the same token, these guys are swimming with sharks now. These guys are festival headliners right now. They find themselves in such a unique position to be the next big metal band of the world, to be in the conversations of the Metallicas and the Panteras and the Anthraxes of the world. Knocked Loose can be that big of a metal act. And all they need to do is sign to a major record label, keep being super heavy, and then they could go from their 1.5 pitiful amount of monthly listeners on Spotify to easily 6, 7, 8, dare I say even 13 million monthly listeners if they just sell out a little bit. And it's proven that their sound works. So the major record label that they signed to isn't going to want to tamper with that so much. So if you still love Knocked Loose, they could be Knocked Loose. They just got to take that second foot out of the hardcore world, out of the DIY, and firmly plant it in corporate metal America. Now I know that's a very silly critique to have about Knocked Loose, because Turnstile sells out and I hate it. Knocked Loose doesn't sell out and I hate it. Cake and eat it too, am I right? But the heart wants what the heart wants and the soul feels what the soul feels, okay? And I have no other choice but to come on here to my YouTube channel and just try to express how I feel through words, okay? Whether you agree with them or not is fine. And irrespective of your agreement of my opinions or not, I gotta move on to charge number 4, and that is 1 count of impersonation. You guys aren't this spooky. Stop trying to be spooky, okay? What's with the big crucifix on the album cover? What's with all the spooky eyeliner and the bald heads? Bald heads don't need to be spooky, okay? You don't need to have Isaac Hale out there being like, I'm a spooky boy, I'm a spooky boy. No, just be hardcore boys playing really heavy music. That's all you need to do. And in that is the kind of cute, kind of like charming thing about Knocked Loose. Oh, they're just a bunch of Southerners. They're out there from Kentucky or wherever the frig they're from. Actually, I should know where they're from. Nailed it. They are from Kentucky. So they don't need to be this kind of like, hey, we're spooky because we're a metal band type thing in order to be really heavy. Isaac Hale can just go up there with his hat on and it's a completely different vibe. He takes the hat off. He's like, oh, I'm a big, scary, tough, bald, menacing prison guy with crucifixes on my pants for some reason. We don't need any of that. That's too much. Just be cool, chill Kentucky boys playing heavy ass music. And believe me, that's gonna resonate with like the Red State, big metal fest, America corporate thing that goes on there. You guys have the potential to make so much goddamn money and just get heavier and heavier and heavier and maybe even be the most successful heavy band of all time. That is your potential out here. And it's being squandered. So that's another charge that I'm just tacking onto here as a bonus. Squandering. And that's going to lead us to our last charge, which I guess now is charge number 6, which is a gigantic heaping helping of neglect. Now this record has 2 main features on it. You got Poppy and you got Chris Motionless from the band Motionless in White. Both of these artists that are featured on this record here are very infamous for collaborating with the WWE. You had Poppy doing all those appearances back in the day on NXT, and Chris Motionless and his band, Motionless in White, just appeared on WrestleMania to sing Rhea Ripley to the ring. So I'm not exactly sure who's neglecting who out here. Is it Knocked Loose neglecting the WWE? Is it the WWE neglecting Knocked Loose? Either way, it's neglect and I will not stand for it. It's egregious. And with the climate that we're standing in here today, WWE has a Def Rebel problem. Def Rebel is the band that churns out all of these themes for their wrestlers, but the problem with all of these themes is that they're generic boring, and crappy. The song hits and nobody in the arena knows who the wrestler's coming out. And that's the big mistake going on here with Def Rebel. But if you had Knocked Loose with Poppy and Chris Motionless, maybe this whole new super group, maybe they could revamp a whole roster's worth of theme songs. So in summation, we have 2 counts of evading dynamics, 1 count of flow resistance, fumbling, impersonation, squandering, and neglect. And that's all on an album that I enjoyed. So imagine what would happen on a record that I don't enjoy. This isn't my favorite version of Knocked Loose. I had other videos where I critique this era of Knocked Loose, and those criticisms do kind of stand, but as a record, I gotta say that there's about as many positives as there are negatives on this thing. But that is a hell of a series of charges, and they're gonna have to spend at least one night in the Slammer. Did you listen to this record yet? What did you think of it? Let me know down below. And while you're down there, please remember to hit like, press subscribe, and until my next upload, watch another upload.